All right, here we go. We're back. Women on the edge, on the edge. We're in the middle of the Texas heat, and all of us are right there on the edge of just trying to get through a day without just sweating to death. It's been a crazy couple of days, but maybe it's going to cool off tomorrow. But tonight we're taking on the queen of all, the one we've all know about. Let's hear it for Jezebel. Boo, hiss. Yes, we do not like this one. She's the big one. She's the one that we all, even if you don't know anything about the Bible, you probably heard about this crazy lady. She's got quite the reputation, and we're going to go through it tonight. We're going to talk about her. We're going to talk about her man. We're going to talk about some other characters that are around them, and I think I might throw a few things at you that maybe you don't know. I always try to do that. Tiny little bit of history, and maybe even a different perspective on who she is and what she was about. All right, this is our Shady Lady little series. For the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about a couple of shady ladies. Next week, next time, we will probably be taking on the woman who is actually worse. A woman who is worse than Jezebel. Did you know that was possible? Yep, a woman worse than her. We will get to her next week. But this week, Jezebel. I made her name. I put a bunch of colors because, she's kind of known for her makeup. So I tried to make her kind of makeup. Just so y'all appreciate my graphics. All right. Good old Jezebel. When you type Queen Jezebel into your Google image search, you get some very interesting of people. So it's you're going to see quite a plethora of images representing the evil queen tonight. It's kind of fun. I always have a little bit of fun with that. But this week we're going to discuss one of the most hated characters in the Bible, Jezebel. She is the most infamous of all the female figures. She is seen as the embodiment of feminine evil. Some references identify Jezebel as the main source of evil, sensuality, witchcraft, hatred of male authority, false teachings in the church, and society at large. She just embodies all of this. This one woman, and these three little stories about her has taken on quite an identity. Some say that the corruption behind her husband, King Ahab's throne, was all Jezebel and her control of him, and what brought down the destruction of the Israelite people. They throw it all in her lap, and we're going to have to look and see if that's really true. Here's our question of the night. Was she eaten by dogs for a good reason? Dog food? Or was she just a misunderstood lady? Let's see if we can figure it out. Let's jump in. All right, here we go. If you want to open your Holy Bibles to 1 Kings and a little bit of 2 Kings, right at the end of 1 Kings, and then we're jumping into 2 Kings a tiny bit, but there's all kinds of stories mixed in there about some other prophets and other kings. But that's the reference if you want to look around in there at any time. That's where we're going to be. Let's talk about the main characters in our narrative. Ahab, of course. Ahab becomes the king of Israel. Now, by this time, Israel has been divided into two nations, Israel and Judah. Now, that is a very complex thing. And if you just be sitting around reading through your Bibles, and you're reading through Kings, and you're trying to figure out what king is in charge here, you have to get one of those really cool spreadsheet timeline kind of things to figure out which king is. There's the king of Judah and the king of Israel, and then they kind of overlap sometimes, and then sometimes their names even overlap. There's a king over here and over there that have the same name, so it can get very confusing. And of course, we know that the timelines are not always in sequence, and so it is a little bit crazy. But for our particular story, we're going to talk about Ahab. Ahab became the king of the nation, the country Israel, known as Israel, of the two, Israel and Judah. He took a wife, and her name is Jezebel. We also are going to talk about Elijah. Elijah was the esteemed prophet of the time, He had quite a career, did some pretty amazing things, everything from raising a child from the dead to performing miracles like oil being produced in a little oil jar for a widow. He took on some mighty prophets. He killed a bunch of people, lots and lots of people. You don't think of him that way, but he did. He killed, or he told people, go kill all those prophets. He did a lot of murdering himself, and he anointed some kings. He did a lot of stuff. He is considered the prophet that we look at when we think about Jesus. There's a connection with him and of course with John the Baptist, because Elijah tended to wear the same outfit that we think of as John the Baptist, the hair, coat, and eating the locust kind of a guy. Naboth is going to be a very important character at one point. His vineyard, his land, his name, all of those things are very, very important. You probably, if you know anything about the Ahab Jezebel story, you already know what I'm talking about. Then there's a guy named Joram. We're going to call him Joram for our story, but sometimes some texts call him Jehoram. He's actually Ahab and Jezebel's son. He's king. His name's Jehoram. And there's also another king, the king of Judah, whose name is Jehoram. So that's why we're just going to call him Joram. But sometimes, depending on which version you're reading, you may see that. And then Jehu. Jehu becomes the next anointed king. And he's the one who ends up getting rid of Jezebel. The only name I don't mention in there is Elisha. He has a very small role in our story, although a big role in the Bible story. So Jezebel has acquired numerous references throughout pop culture. There's bands named after her. There's all kinds of movies. There's stories. There's bad people who like to associate with her and take on her name. There's a lot of references to her, and none of them are very flattering. There's nobody who's running around going, I think I'll name my next daughter Jezebel. Yeah, that doesn't happen unless you're a little weird. Okay, let's talk about backstory. It's King David, his son Solomon becomes king, and he is awesome. We love King Solomon. Yay, King Solomon. He looks good. He smells good. He loves Jehovah. He's super wise. He gets to start building the temple, which David didn't get to do, and that's great. Solomon the wise, we love him, but he was a little too good in that he was very, very popular guy. He starts collecting wives and concubines in the thousands, and this is not something that makes God very happy. Makes Solomon very happy. It makes the nations around him very happy, because he's doing it to bring treaties and keep everybody, all the countries around him. But it is definitely going against what God has asked of his kings. And when you have that many wives that have come from lands that Solomon has conquered or he has acquired by some sort of treaty, the odds are that they are not going to all be team God, team Jehovah. In fact, they are really more team pagan. These wives and girlfriends, concubines, are able to convince Solomon to go over to the dark side as well, because that's the way they were raised, and somehow his wisdom just sort of seeps out of him, and next thing you know, he's got some pagan stuff happening throughout his kingdom. God was very unhappy with Solomon's choices, and so after he dies, a civil war happens, and that's when we have the division of the kingdoms, Kingdom Israel and Kingdom Judah. King after king comes to the throne, and each one gets worse. They're in both kingdoms. We have descriptions in Judah and in Israel. We have descriptions of this king doing this and this king, and then they kill this one, and then they kill that one, and then this one takes over in a coup, and then he kills 70 of the sons. And then, I mean, it might be cool to be a prince of a king in this time period, but boy, if somebody takes over, you are dead, man. You need to run, start running fast, because this is not good. So king after king after king, and every one of them, it says they do something bad. Very few. I think I read there's like 5 good kings considered good kings, and like, I don't know, 33 bad kings or evil kings throughout this time period. I'm totally kind of throwing out some numbers, but just one after another. It's just horrible, worshiping pagans. It is, the pagan worship is very prevalent throughout the kingdom. And then we get to King Ahab, and we're told something amazing about King Ahab. King Ahab is, he looks at all these other guys and he's like, hold my beer. I got something to say here. Watch this. You think these guys are bad? I'm going to take it to a whole nother level. So he is described as Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. And then you get to the next sentence, and it says he not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, that's the guy from Judah, but he also married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. So he was already doing bad stuff. He was already in a mess. He was already just destroying the kingdom, the king stuff of being evil. He had it down. He knew exactly how to pull off that. But he decided to go to the next level, and he ended up marrying the daughter of Ethbaal. Now, I don't know. We know very well from our last many lessons that women didn't usually have a choice of who they got to marry. So Jezebel came over. Most likely, she did not have a choice in this, but she was part of the treaty. Everybody, the men were happy. She was probably not, but it's very important to see that she was the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and that tells us a whole lot. Who she was, where she was from. Ethbaal and his wife were very big time pagans, big worshipers, high priests in the temple worship that they had in their part of the country. She was where she was from was like most likely a beach, kind of a Mediterranean, very nice place. And here she comes to the desert with this Ahab guy, and she's like, you know what? I'm gonna make myself fit in here. You're gonna see, we're gonna be fine. Well, he set up a temple in Samaria. He went ahead and said, you know, Queen, I really think you're cool. I'm just going to go ahead and set up a temple right here, and you can just do that Baal worship, and I'll join you. Everything will be great. And then they set up an Asherah pole. We're not totally sure what all those are, but we do know that they were bad. That's what you did when you didn't want to worship the true God. You brought in the Asherah poles and the Baal temples. And it said Ahab also made an Asherah pole, and again did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than all of the kings of Israel before him. Great job, Ahab. You get the prize. Jezebel brought an extra level to Ahab's evil. She one-upped him. She took him to the highest level of difficulty, and said, Ahab, you thought you were bad. Let's really do this right. And the duo was so scary that even we find out later that there's a prophet named Elijah who is the best of all the prophets, and he ended up hiding from her at one point, from them, because of their terror throughout the land and their reputation. So the story of Jezebel is basically three things that we find out, three parts about her. We're going to call them the battle of the gods, the murder at the vineyard, and the coup d'etat, throwing in a little of my French from high school and college. Jezebel was the daughter of the king in the rich coastal city of Sidon. Her people, the Phoenicians, were cosmopolitan and sophisticated and controlled large areas of the Eastern Mediterranean. And as well as being rulers, her parents were high priests in the worship of Baal. Jezebel herself most likely was a priestess of Baal. She was probably trained to lead as a priestess and to command as a princess. We don't know how old she was, obviously, when she became a queen of Israel, but she most likely from the time of birth was this being a priestess and being a part of Baal worship was a part of her life. When Jezebel was old enough, she married Ahab, king of Israel. Brought up as a Phoenician, she understood the duty to worship Baal and Asherah. She believed these gods regulated the fertility of the country and that she now lived in. That's what Baal did. He was one of the leading gods, pagan gods, who oversaw nature and all the things of the that you would see to be a part of your daily life, your food, your trees, your brain, everything. Because of past kings' idolatry, many of the people of Israel shared her beliefs. They had already been worshiping Baal. We know the moment they got out of Egypt and Moses disappeared up the mountain, Aaron ended up building them that cow, the big cow, the golden one out of all the jewelry. And so they were always taking on these pagan gods. And so Yahweh, the true God, Baal, Asherah, they were worshiping these gods. There were pockets of wonderful prophets who and people who did refuse to worship these pagan gods, but there were quite a few of them. And she by bringing this temple in and bringing her beliefs in, she was able to connect with them and them with her. But there were still quite a few that did follow Yahweh, but they had to go into hiding. There's actually an interesting story. If you read those passages that I gave you, there's an interesting story about Elijah going to Obadiah, who worked in the palace. And we're pretty sure it's the same Obadiah who wrote that tiny little book at the end of the Old Testament. And this Obadiah said, hey, I've already hidden 150 prophets. Please don't make me go give that message to Ahab and Jezebel. Elijah, please don't make me give him that message because they'll kill me, and I'm working really hard for God. Please. It's a very funny little story, actually, but you can see kind of the terror of Obadiah, and yet he was actually very courageous. So the concept of the fear that was a part of their lives, but also the courage that these people had to exhibit to just follow the Lord. And here they are, the chosen people, but to follow the Lord in their own land was astronomical. So let's talk about the battle of the gods. The first big story of Jezebel and Elijah. She really hated the prophets. Any prophets that were not hers, she hated them. She was always going around killing them. She had them killed. This was a major part of her daily life. Finding another prophet, have him killed. She had anyone associated with the God of Israel killed. The only one left. Well, he's not the only one. I said that wrong. There were others, but he was the main one. He was the one who kept his voice, who did not go into hiding. He was the one who was willing to step forward and speak truth. A drought came to Israel. We all know why. Elijah sent word that there would be no rain until he said so. I will let you know, Ahab, when the drought is going to be over. And 3 years went by. And it says, Elijah the Tishbite said, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be no dew or rain in the next few years, except at my word. It's hard for us modern people to understand what drought is or what it was at that time, but it was difficult. It was terrible. It was famine, complete famine. If you don't have water, you don't have anything. So let's talk about the idols, the idolatry really fast, just having very, very tiny basic understanding of what was going on with this Baal worship. Baal is the pagan god who appears most often in the Bible. If you were a little kid going to Sunday school, you heard the stories about the pagan god Baal, and you didn't know what they were talking about, but this is the main one. He was the personification of life-giving forces in nature, especially rain, and his followers believed that his semen was falling when it rained, and that was what impregnated the earth to make little things grow. Always trying to figure stuff out, and that's why they figured out physics. Since the meteorology, since the Middle East is always in need of water, the worship of Baal was kind of a big deal. Like, we haven't seen any water in a little bit. The ground is dry again. Let's go find a Baal temple. Then we got the Asherah stuff. I'm saying it right. It's like Aster. Anyway, I'm sorry. Asherah was the supreme mother goddess. She has a couple of different names that are similar. I'm sure I'm pronouncing Asherah completely wrong from what it was back in ancient Hebrew. But she gave life to everything, good and bad alike, also known as the Queen of Heaven. If you're a good charismatic, you've heard the phrase Queen of Heaven for sure. But she was definitely one of the other big pagan gods that was a part of their culture. And what Ahab and Jezebel were worshiping, especially Jezebel. So to ancient people, this drought time was really tragic. It was very difficult. Old people were dying, young people were dying first, of course. And as the drought got worse and worse, and this is only a 3-year drought, but the desperation of the people was growing. And every kind of prayer, they were all throwing up every prayer, bringing in every offering they could, anything to get their God to listen. And then God told Elijah, time for the famine to end. And he sent him directly to Ahab. And Elijah told Ahab, okay, time for this famine to end. God said so. So why don't you gather up all those prophets, that are really important to you? Get those 450 prophets that hang out at the dinner table with Jezebel, and those 400 prophets that are of Asherah, and bring them all together. And we're going to have a prophet dance off. Woo, woo, woo. Let's go. So there is a great story about this this thing. And once, if you've been in Sunday school long enough, and since we're talking mostly about Jezebel, we're not going to go through all of the story, but it does get kind of crazy. All those prophets start dancing and going nuts out there, up there on Mount Carmel. And they're literally cutting themselves. They're dancing till they can't go anymore. It says they start early in the morning, they go till noon, and they're just going nuts. And at different points, Elijah's kind of throwing out sassy remarks at him, like, hey, maybe he's gone on vacation, maybe your God is in the bathroom, going to the bathroom. I mean, there's, depending on which version you read, that's probably in the Message, but it's just all in there, he's just throwing sass at him. And really, there's a lot of sass. Even Ahab, right at the beginning, he's like, is that you, Elijah, the one who's giving me trouble? And Elijah's like, I haven't given you any trouble. You're the one causing the trouble. So, they're just going back and forth. And Jezebel, she throws out a lot of sass throughout these stories too. So there's a lot of stuff going back and forth. But these prophets are just going hard. All these prophets are just dancing and singing and everything. And then it's Elijah's turn, and we all know what happens. Elijah gets ready, and he says, okay, my turn. Go ahead and pours a bunch of water on those things, and he builds up his own altar of stones, 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel, has him pour water on it, has the cow, the big bull up there, and then of course we get the big explosion. Ahab sent the message. Let's see, I'm back on the before they actually had the dance off. Elijah approached all the people, and all these people are up on Mount Carmel, and Elijah looks at all of them, and he says, not just the prophet, he's not looking at the prophets, he's looking at the people, because they had time to get word out. People started gathering, people were coming to the show, to the dance off. And Elijah looks at all these people, and he says, how long will you hobble back and forth between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow God. If Baal is God, follow Baal. The people gave no answer. That tells us a lot. A little bit scary. Okay, so the contest is going on, power of God being called down, fire, come on, let's do it. He let them go first, and he made fun of them the whole time. The priests, they lost in a spectacular way. God, as soon as Elijah says go, 3, 2, 1, boom, fire, explosions, joy raining down. It's fantastic. All 450 prophets of Baal take off running, and they're hunted down. It doesn't say anything about Elijah killing the prophets of Asherah, but they did say, go get those guys. And then all of a sudden the people were like, oh, we're team Elijah. And so he has them go hunt down all the prophets of Baal, and they slaughter them. There's a lot of slaughtering going on in these passages. If you're slaughtering for our guys, our God, team Yahweh, it's okay. If you're slaughtering for team Baal, bad slaughtering. I'm just saying, there's a lot of slaughtering. Elijah then said to Ahab, get up and celebrate and drink, because I hear the sound of a rainstorm coming. And Ahab's like, oh, cool. We should eat something. Ahab has issues. So Ahab got up to celebrate with food and drink, because now all of a sudden Ahab is team Yahweh. Team pagan, his team lost. You hate those kind of people who are sitting in the stands and they can't decide who to root for. But then when their team wins, they're like, oh yeah, I already had that jersey. Yeah, that jersey was in my closet. So yeah, so Ahab gets up, and then he's like, oh, dang, I gotta tell my wife, I forgot. I'm gonna get my chariot. He gets in that chariot and he starts going, and he's heading back to Jezreel. Jezreel, we find out throughout these passages, is where they have a second palace. They got one in Samaria, then they got the one in Jezreel, and that's where Jezebel likes to hang out. So he gets in his chariot and he starts heading toward Jezreel. Well, Elijah is watching the sky. Y'all know that story, the watching, having his servant watch, and finally the cloud starts coming and forming, and he takes off running. He is filled with the Spirit. He runs faster than Ahab's chariot in the rainstorm, and he gets back there. They get back to where Jezebel is, and Elijah outran the chariot in the rain and beat him to Jezreel. So Ahab told, this is the scriptures, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done. I wonder how he told that story. Oh, and I had a little cow at the end. How he had killed all Baal's prophets with the sword. And now, of course, he's team Jezebel because he's standing in front of her. Jezebel then sent a messenger to Elijah. Jezebel now has a voice. It's very interesting. A lot of women in the word do not really have a voice. And I'm talking about the good women and the bad women. They don't really have a voice. We don't hear about them. We have to read between the lines to hear and figure out what they're saying. And but she's got some sass. She's got a voice. She says something. In fact, that's kind of what a lot of people don't like about her. But she says, since this message, now Elijah in our scriptures, Elijah and Jezebel actually never meet, but they send a lot of messages to each other. Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah with this message: may the gods do whatever they want to me if by this time tomorrow I haven't made your life like the life of one of them. Wow, she dropped it hard. This is her big moment. This is her like, oh, this is her big verse. If you want to have the Jezebel verse, this is the Jezebel verse right here. She kind of reminds me a little bit of Cruella. Basically, any Disney bad woman is what she reminds me of. You got the Wicked Witch from Snow White. You got the Wicked Witches from, oh, hold on. That's not a spoiler alert, Deborah. Sorry. But we got any Wicked Witches we got going throughout any Disney movies. Just picture one of them, and that's Jezebel, but maybe a little worse because there's a lot more murdering going on. Elijah was terrified. Okay, now we've all probably had these discussions in Sunday school. Why in the world this prophet took off running after he had just killed all of these other prophets and saw the power of God? We don't know exactly. One thing I learned many, many years ago, being in a lot of, kind of spirit-filled life and being in worship services and seeing some really crazy, wonderful, miraculous things and being a part of it, whether it's been conferences or really great worship services or time when I'm with the people of God and you really feel God's spirit and all that stuff. And you get home and a lot of times you're like, whew, wow, that was great. What do I do now? And somebody described it to me one time as, you got to learn to land your plane. You got to learn when you're up high, you're flying high. A lot of times we crash when we come out of those really exciting moments. And it could be anything. It could be just some really cool thing that you did, a presentation that you made, or a big moment with your family or your friends, or even like a wedding or a big party or something. And you have to learn that everything doesn't stay at this really high level. We have to learn how to, sometimes we come back down and we have to land a little gently to come out of the clouds. And then eventually, hopefully we get those big, exciting moments again. Elijah apparently did not land his plane well because he was terrified of Jezebel, and he got up and he ran for his life. He had survived earthquakes and fires, and he raised people from the dead. He'd outdanced 1,000 pagan prophets. He'd outrun a king's chariot. And this woman's threat did him in. Elijah ran out to the desert. He ran, it says, a day's journey, which is, I think, kind of funny because it says, she says, if by this time tomorrow, and he ran a day's journey. He's like, oh, she ain't gonna catch me. I'm gonna run. I'm gonna be like Superman. I'm gonna turn back time. Y'all saw that movie? And he sat down and he says, God, I want to die. Take my life. But here's the thing. God understood. And once again, one of my favorite verses, a theme verse, God says, get up, eat something. Let him take a little nap. What we all need, just get a little nap in, just eat something and you'll be fine. Just relax. He let him chill. He'd been through a lot. He'd had a rough couple of days. He had some trauma in his life. He just went ahead and let him sleep. And then he told him the next thing to do after he got his rest. Now, Jezebel and Ahab had a 20-year reign. They had built it in the city of Samaria, a huge opulent palace of ivory. The archaeologists are actually finding references to it. They're finding places of ivory, and they had ivory everywhere, which is a little scary. How many little elephants had to pass away for their ivory temple? But they had a very opulent palace with lush, beautiful gardens all around. And so they lived well. They knew how to take care of themselves. And the palace that they had was a 2-story building called the Ivory House because of all the decorations. And archaeologists, they dug up a bunch of stuff. And they also had a second royal house that was built in Jezreel, if you want to get your map out. It was a villa. It was a beautiful villa overlooking the rolling hills and vineyards. Ooh, cue the vineyard. Jezreel stood in a commanding position looking over the valley of Jezreel. Now, near the villa of Jezreel was this really nice vineyard of Naboth. Ahab needed to amalgamate this land. He had these vineyards over here, and he had these vineyards. There's this like one vineyard, sort of like the house in the movie Up, you know, where he just said, I'm not moving, and they built everything around it, you know, but here's that house. Well, that's what he had. There was this vineyard that he needed, and he could see it when he would look out from his walls, his castle. He could look at it from his villa, and he could see that, well, there's a nice vineyard. I'll just bring all that together. And he decided he needed to grow some. It says some places it said vegetables. So he had, well, think of it as vineyard, but it may have just been some pumpkins he needed out there, or some watermelon. He made a fair offer to Naboth, but Naboth said no. And it says that Ahab went to him and he made him a nice offer. And he said, and if you don't want to sell it to me, well, I'll just give you another vineyard or give you another pumpkin patch. And Naboth's like, no, there's this tradition that, the property stays in the family, and we've inherited, and we've had this property since the Israelites first came to this land. We want to stay there, and we're not going to sell. This was the tradition. He defied the king in a sense, but not really, because he had a right to this land. So it says that Ahab lay down on his bed and he turned his face away. He wouldn't eat anything. His wife Jezebel came to him. Why are you upset? Why are you not eating any food? She asked, and he answered her, okay, we got to do our best whiny voice. Okay. Now Elijah was upset and he wasn't eating, but God took care of him. Jezebel's taking care of her man, but a little bit different. He answered her, which, anytime we have reputation, remember, we have to pay attention to that. But anyway, I was talking to Naboth, and I said, sell me your vineyard. It just seemed like not that big a deal with Jezebel. I just said, sell me your vineyard. And if you prefer, I'll give you another vineyard for it. But he said, I won't give you my vineyard. Which, Naboth had a very good reason, but that's the way Ahab sounded. Then his wife Jezebel said to him, aren't you the one who rules Israel? Duh, get up, eat some food, cheer up. I'll get Naboth's vineyard for you myself. She didn't even tell him what to do. She just said, I got you, baby. I'll take care of it for you. Now, she didn't think about Israel laws the way Ahab did. Ahab was an Israelite. He understood that Naboth had a reason for it. You don't just to get to take land. You're not supposed to do that. He understood that Israelite kings, they did not have unlimited power. Kings in surrounding countries did. They did whatever they want to, but they were supposed to, in Israel, have a little bit of a good justice system. And even though he was whining about it, that's what he was going to stick with, because that was the rule of the land. Even though he wasn't a great guy, but every once in a while he was like, okay, I guess I'll have to do this. But he was pouting about it. Jezebel was not an Israelite. And where she came from, ultimate power. Parents had ultimate power. She didn't care about the Israel zoning laws. They were not something she considered. So if he wanted to go lay under his thunder blanket in bed, she was fine with that, because she's going to take care of him. She's going to get this vineyard because she wants to be able to look out on her nice property as well. So he can just stay there, thunder blanket and all, and she's going to take care of things. So she took matters into her own hands. She had Naboth and his sons accused. She sent out some letters. She put the king's seal on it, and to the leaders of the town of Jezreel, and told them specifically, find a couple of guys to bring false accusations against Naboth and his family, and get false evidence, get them convicted, get them executed. And of course they did that. The vineyard being the property of a convicted traitor, of course, that meant the state, the kingdom got it back, and Ahab got his vineyard. Some have said she might have, simply, she could have just taken it. She could have just gone ahead and said, well, this is the king, and, done something like that. But she went all the way in. She did a whole false accusation thing. She used the government system as she could. She bribed people. She talked to people. She threatened people. And she, and then she got what her husband wanted. Jezebel hadn't just sent word to kill Naboth. She worked within the culture. She called a fast. She used the king's seal to convince the town elders to bring the charges. Jezebel is not simply an evil dictator. She's clever. Which is even more dangerous than just being somebody who's just mean. She was really using other people to do her work for her. She could have just had one guy and said, go out and kill that guy. It's kind of the way David did with Bathsheba. He wanted Bathsheba. He had her husband sent to the front of the line. He could have figured out some other way to get rid of him, but they used these little ploys to get what they wanted. Very dangerous, the cleverness of it all. And Ahab, he's like, oh, cool. I get my vineyard. I'm so excited. He gets up from under his thunder blanket. He runs out and he does a little dance in his vineyard. Yay, I got my vineyard. And he's so happy. Because of the evil done against Naboth and his family by Ahab and Jezebel, Elijah shows up and he prophesies how God actually sends somebody, and he prophesies how God is going to bring about their deaths. There was not a whole lot of time. It's like it finishes, and then all of a sudden Elijah is speaking this word and saying, I know what you did. It got around. You didn't keep your secret. Not that she probably cared about keeping a secret, but God is not happy with what you've done, because God is always for the innocent. He's always against injustice, and he'll come down hard on that. And this is the pronouncement of the curse that Elijah gave on them. The Lord is going to bring great harm on you to you and sweep you away. He will not let a single one of your male descendants survive. He is going to destroy your family, as he did the family of King Jeroboam and the family of King Baasha. For you have made him very angry, and you have led all of Israel into sin. The Lord has also told me that the dogs of Jezreel will tear apart the body of your wife Jezebel. The members of your family who die in the city shall be eaten by dogs, and those who die in the country shall be eaten by vultures. And you're not even going to be able to run away, because then the birds are going to catch you. Nothing's going to get you. You're not going to make it. Ahab then repents. It says he's sad and downcast, and it's reported to Elijah, and it says that God decided to hold off the judgment until of him and all of the everybody dying, until his son becomes a ruler. Now Ahab still, he gonna get it, but it's not going to be quite as bad as quickly for Ahab, but it's still coming. After these curses were pronounced, the scriptures give us very little hint as to the level of evil these two walked in. But it does say this, got a little parentheses, and it says, truly, there has never been anyone like Ahab, who sold out by doing evil in the Lord's eyes, evil that his wife Jezebel led him to do. Ahab's actions were deplorable. He followed after the worthless idols, exactly like the Amorites had done, the very ones the Lord had removed before the Israelites. Little history lessons. I'm not going to go into it, but I mean, if you're mentioning Amorites in there with the horribleness of Jezebel and Ahab, you're on level 1000. So this is the parentheses that says who Ahab is. I actually, right before we started tonight, I actually did a quick Google search, because I remember there's other kings in these lists of kings throughout Kings and First Kings, Second Kings, and all that it talks about, well, this king did this in the eyes of the Lord, and this one did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And I was like, I wonder which one was the worst, because Ahab was kind of close to the beginning. And I typed it in, who was the worst king? And guess what? It was Ahab. It was Ahab. Ahab and Jezebel made quite a team, but Ahab is considered the worst. And this is the verse that says it, and nobody topped him. So now we're to scene number 3, the coup d'etat. King Ahab spent a good part of his reign out on the battlefield. I mean, we think of him now. I mean, I told the story of him laying on the couch, whining under his thunder blanket, but he actually did a lot of fighting out on the battlefield. He was always going after, he would go after places in the other kingdom, Judah, but then he and and this happened quite a lot, the two kings from each of the kingdom would join forces, and then they would go after other kingdoms that were causing problems. So he was out on the battlefield quite a bit. And in the battle that he and actually the guy from Judah, king of Judah, they were fighting, Ahab went ahead and disguised himself so that he they wouldn't like find him and concentrate the attack on him. But he was wounded in the battle, mortally wounded. And in the aftermath of the battle, the prophecy of Elijah came true. Ahab had fallen and died in his chariot. I think it says that it was a stray arrow and it got into a place in his armor that was not covered, a little crack in the armor. His blood seeped over the boards of the chariot floor. And then when he was taken back to Samaria, the dogs licked up the blood before the chariot could be washed. So prophecy number 1 fulfilled. Ahab was succeeded by his son Ahaziah, whose reign only lasted 2 years. He was injured somehow in some sort of bizarre accident, which, you know, when you're in the house of Jezebel, there ain't no telling what kind of accident it was. And he died soon after. So then bro Joram shows up and he becomes king. Both of these young men were sons of Jezebel. She had a daughter too. Oh my gosh, we're going to hear about her soon. But Joram is now the king. And this is when the story changes just a bit, because by now Elijah, he has trained up his protege, Elisha, and Elijah got the cool ride into the chariot, into the heavens, flaming chariots. Chariots are cool. Good things happen in them. If you're with God, bad things happen in them. If you're with team pagan. So if you're going to be in a chariot, make sure you're on the right team. You might get a nice ride to heaven. But no, not good if you're on a team, you're not on the right team. Elisha anoints a new king of Israel named Jehu. And Jehu doesn't mess around. It is quite a story. I encourage you to read it. Jehu is anointed king. He walks out of the tent. It's kind of funny because it says Elisha sends this younger prophet and says, go anoint Jehu. And then as soon as you finish anointing him and pronounce the little prophecy over him of what he's supposed to do, run out of the tent. And that's exactly what he does. So he takes off running, and then Jehu comes out of the tent, and all of his, because he's like a commander. He's a commander in I think Ahab's army. And he comes out, and his other soldiers are out there and like, who's that guy? And he goes, oh, it was nobody, you know, it was just nobody. And they go, no, seriously, tell us who it was. And he was like, well, he just anointed me as king. And they're like, yes, we've been waiting for this. Perfect. Now the king we want is here. And he's like, well, you know, maybe we should make a plan. It says they start planning the overthrow of the kingdom of Joram and of course Jezebel. So he gets anointed king. And then this guy, he's a very intense guy. At one point he is described as being able to be seen from far away and identified from far away just simply by the way he drives his chariot. So he's a very intense guy. As soon as he gets going, he has plans. He's ready to go all the way. He's exactly like the kind of guy you want to be leading your army and leading your kingdom in the movies. Let's go. He immediately comes up with this coup against the dynasty of Ahab, and he knows all the prophecies. He was there when, it actually refers to this, he was there when Elijah pronounced the prophecy of how Ahab and Jezebel were going to die and the dogs were going to eat them and drink their blood and the whole bit. And he's like, I want to be a part of that. Let's go. So he goes hard. He saw his chance then when King Joram and King Ahaziah, was from Judah, so they're having one of those joint battles against the bad guy that they didn't like, and they're having this battle, and they see they're resting. They got hurt a little bit. They got wounded. King Joram, and he's Jezebel's son. He got wounded in the battle, and so he's over at Jezreel, and he's kind of recovering from his wounds. And he and Ahaziah see Jehu and his crew coming. They're like, oh, I wonder what they're doing. Well, let's go see what they're doing. And they get a little bit closer, and they get a bit closer, and then it just goes downhill from there. And they eventually they get it. Let's see what it says here. When Joram saw Jehu, he says, do you come in peace, Jehu? And he said, how can there be peace as long as the immoralities of your mother Jezebel and her many acts of sorcery continue? Wow. There's no hi, there's no hello, there's no even like hiding it and trying to get a little closer. He's just like shouting at him, your mom's terrible. I'm coming for you, coming for you. And then Joram turned his chariot around and fled. And he shouted, it actually says he shouted at Ahaziah, Ahaziah, it's a trap. And they take off running. And of course, pew, 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 they got him in the back and they are dead. He didn't just kill Joram, king of Israel. He killed King Ahaziah, king of Judah as well. He set this trap and lured him closer. And then he says, hey, these guys that I just killed, go take Joram's body and throw it down over there in Naboth's vineyard, because they were right next to it. Throw it in Naboth's vineyard, because I heard the prophecy. I know where he's supposed to die. And we know what he did to Naboth. And Jezebel was told of her son's death. She may have seen it out there. She may have seen something happening out there from the tower, but she was told of her son's death. And now she's getting ready. The slaughter did not stop for Jehu. He just kept on driving. The success of the coup depended on the death of every member of the royal family. Jehu continues on to Jezreel to finish what he'd begun. And then it says, Jehu then went to Jezreel. Then Jezebel heard of it. She put on her eyeshadow and arranged her hair. She looked down out of the window. When Jehu came through the gate, she said, do you come in peace, Zimri, you master murderer? Now, y'all, if you're going to read your Bibles, you got to do a little research. She was doing a dig. That was sass upon sass upon sass. She was not scared. She put on the eyeshadow. She arranged her hair. She looked down out of the window. Now, a little back note. Remember when Deborah and Jael were in the big battle and they beat everybody? And I told you that in the Song of Deborah, there's this crazy part where Deborah tells this whole story about how they defeated Sisera. They defeated him, and Jael was this great woman, and she's singing this song, and at the very end of her song, she starts going against Sisera's mother. She says, and Sisera's mother will be looking out the window, expecting him to come back from the battle after he has raped and pillaged all of our people, and yet he will never come. And you're like, what, Deborah, are you kidding? So there's this thing about looking out windows that is kind of a big deal. There's some other references in the word. So anybody in the ancient times reading these kind of things, they're going to put those connections together. But she does a little sass at Jehu with this guy, Zimri. The thing with Zimri is Zimri was a king like a couple of kings ago who had killed Ahab's like grandpappy or something, the king, and he killed the king to be king, and then he only gets to reign for 7 days. So when she's calling him Zimri, she's trying to scare him, saying, oh yeah, you think you're going to be king? But you're going to get killed too. You ain't nobody. So she's like throwing like sass at this guy. And here he is like riding hard. And he's got his people with him. She is not scared. Anybody who has told you, I've heard this, but then I started reading through it. You know, I'm going hard for you guys, doing the Lord's work, finding all the little intricate details. But it doesn't say anything about her being scared. And yet I was always kind of told that. I seem to remember that. Well, she got all dressed up because, you know, she knew she was going to die. No, I do not think that's what was going on. When Jezebel heard what happened to her son, she knew immediately what lay in store for her, but she didn't flinch. She knew he was coming. She dressed herself in full queen regalia. The hair gets done. The eyeshadow goes on with the ornate ritual makeup of a high priest princess of Baal and Asherah. She was getting on her war paint. She was putting on her war gear. She was not scared of this guy. She had already seen all of her prophets killed by Elijah and his God. And now you think she's scared of Jehu? Probably she believed that she was going to be able to call down her God and her power to beat this guy too. She was putting on war paint. She was ready to go, ready for battle in high priestess swag. Painting her face was more than just like a fashion statement for a queen or a princess. It was a ritual makeup. It had to do with, hey, I'm not ordinary. I'm above you. I'm a higher state than you. It was a badge of her office. It showed her rank. She had on her full everything. That I'm going to look different than anything. I'm not like riding with dirt and sweat on my face. I'm clean. I'm ready to go. I got my makeup, my power on. Jezebel was not expecting the guy was to die, but was planning to scare Jehu with her power, the same way that she has scared Elijah. Jehu, he wouldn't have any of that though. So all he had to do though was look up, because she did die, and she died as a queen should die. It was magnificent. It was defiant. She was hurling insults at this murderers coming at her to the last moment of her life. And she died, you know, ready to go. I mean, she wasn't just like waiting in her bed, like, oh, I'm gonna go find my husband's thunder blanket. I'm kind of scared, or I'm gonna bow down to him and maybe ask for mercy. She didn't ask for mercy from God, from Jehu, from nobody. She kept her confidence in her God, her pagan God, all the way to the end, and she died. Jehu had actually called up to and said, is anybody paying attention? Who's on my side? Who's on God's side? And there were some guys that were looking out the window, and that implies that they were saying, we're on your side. They weren't hiding in the back. They were saying, hey, something's going on here. We're a part of this. And he told them exactly what to do. She pushed, and we all know she was pushed out the window. And then Jehu went and celebrated. And while he was celebrating with his friends and the soldiers, they had taken Jezreel and he was now the king, he all of a sudden remembered Jezebel. He was like, you know, we should probably bury her. She's a queen. We should bury her. And he sent some people to go bury her, and they couldn't even find her. They found I think her hands and her feet, not much else, which I didn't do too deep of a dive. I did see a couple of things. There were references to this was symbolic of certain things for ancient cultures, what they actually found of her, if that was actually true. But there wasn't really anything left to bury, is really kind of our point. And then he went ahead and kept the promise, did what he'd been told to do in the prophecy. He married every one of the male children in her family, about 70 in all, ordered that their severed heads be sent to him in baskets. Ooh, that was fun. So in Israel, it was, of course, a travesty to not be buried. It was pretty horrific. And so this ending was considered quite fitting for this queen. It does seem that Jezebel takes a bigger hit as evil than many of the men in scripture. She did some pretty awful things, but we can look very easily, just a few passages this way or that way, and see some really awful things that others did too in the name of their pagan gods. So it's interesting. I'm not Team Jezebel, believe me, but I do think history-wise and just taking a look at the levels of evil and different things, it's interesting to try to figure out why she gets worser reputation for evil than others. I mean, she did lots of bad stuff. I just find it interesting. It's just one of those things that Stacie likes to think about. She's considered a promiscuous woman, which is interesting because it really never says anything about her being promiscuous. It doesn't say anything about her running around on Ahab. Now there is, because of the idolatry that she was in, being the priestess, there was possibility, likely, you know, some sexual activity that was happening within being a priestess, but that would have been more like within the culture of that religion. Don't know for sure if she participated in that part of it. There's nothing that says that. It's been assumed. And the fact that it says she put on makeup, that sends a lot of people crazy. They just assume, well, you did a womanly, feminine thing. That means you were doing something sensual or sexual. Not necessarily true. But that's what she's considered, a promiscuous woman, that she led her husband astray, is the name most associated with female wickedness. We see wickedness, actually, the truth is we see wickedness and weakness going together throughout this story. When no one stood up against Jezebel, her plans were able to be done. If someone had stood up, when you see someone stand up against the wickedness, then things begin to fall. When weakness is coupled with the wickedness, it just prospers, it thrives. Her evil plans and all the wicked plans are able to happen. Let me give you a couple of examples. So Ahab, he knew the true God, Yahweh. He was born and raised in Israel. He knew about Yahweh and knew that he should not marry from outside of their people, but he did it anyway. He married foreign women. Ahab let her prophets and of Baal and Asherah become prominent in the kingdom. Elijah, he backed down. There was a weakness for him. I'm giving you points of weakness that allowed wickedness to arise within these stories. Elijah backed down when she threatened him after her priests were killed. There were still a bunch of prophets, priests of Asherah, and there was still her that could have been dealt with, and was not. He backed. He ran really fast. He had the spirit in him to run, but then all of a sudden he backed down. So there was a weakness there. Now Elijah, he gets a lot of credit, but there was that moment of weakness. Ahab, he let her carry out these plans to get Naboth's vineyard, and we saw a lot of weakness from Ahab then. And then the city officials they could have said, no, we're not bringing false accusations against this guy. We've known him forever. We've known him since he was a little kid. He like picked our pumpkins in the pumpkin patch. And they went ahead and hired the false witnesses to accuse Naboth. So there's a weakness, there's a willingness to go along with the wickedness that at different points could have been stopped. So that's kind of what bothers me about the concept of this Jezebel being the big woman of evil, the woman who is considered the worst of the worst. But do we allow it and benefit from it like Ahab? That's what we have to ask. When we see injustice, like the kind of things that Jezebel was doing, when we see things like injustice in a government system, when we see injustice in a church system, injustice even within our own family, do we stand up to it, or do we allow it? And do we benefit from it ourselves, like Ahab did? Do we allow it to continue like those dudes from Jezreel did? Or do we speak truth to it? Elijah, many times he did speak truth to it. Elisha spoke truth to it. Jehu spoke truth against it and was able to stop certain aspects of it, or pronounce, curses on them and things like that? Or do we push it out the window like those that closest to her did? Do we say, oh, I see injustice, I'm going to join in forces with the one who should be the true ruler, who is bringing justice? I'm going to join forces with them. Now, I ain't saying we push anybody out a window, but the metaphorical way of connecting with them, just like in Deborah and Jael's story. You remember Jael? She just was being a tent mama. It describes her as the wife of her husband. I can't remember his name, but she is a wife, but she lived in this tent. And then the guy came, but her husband had a treaty with the good guys. And so when the bad guys came, she took action, just like the people that saw their opportunity to push her out the window took action when the time came. This is what we always have to ask ourselves when we're looking at stories like Jezebel and Ahab. We're not really dealing with those kind of things specifically in our countries in America, but what we are supposed to recognize injustice and say, well, what can I do about it? And some injustice is horrible and huge and terrible. Some really horrible, evil things are done in simply the name of the next trend or the next big issue of the day. Do we look at evil not just for the effect it may have on us? Well, I don't want to deal with that because that's going to make my life hard. But are we looking at it for those who might be hurt, or but for those it might hurt and affect around us? How are we helping those around us? These quotes, things like evil prospers when good men do nothing. Of course, one of my favorites from Albus Dumbledore: it takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. Weakness and wickedness go together. We have to be stronger and braver. Jezebel is evil. She manipulated social and religious systems to her advantage. She's a big fat liar, pants on fire, and she's a murderer. Her crimes, though, had nothing to do with the fact that she's a woman, and that is actually used against her and used against a lot of women a great deal. I have actually, one time when I was like 12 years old, I was in this private Christian middle school, this little church school we were in, and it's one of those self-paced kind of things, and I was supposed to do a book report, and I read the book. I liked the book. It's all right. It's Pilgrim's Progress. I didn't really like I mean, it's all right, but I don't recommend it. There's better stuff. But but I was supposed to do a book report, and I didn't want to do the book report. I just didn't feel like doing it, and I kept putting it off, putting it off, putting it off. And there was this assistant teacher that she was always walking around helping people, and I didn't do it. And that morning, she comes in again and she says, "Why didn't you do your book? Did you do your book report?" And I was like, "No, I didn't do any book report." And she called me a Jezebel. She said, "Well, you little Jezebel." I didn't know what that meant, y'all, but I was like, I think that was bad. What just happened here? And I felt pretty awful about it. I mean, now here I am, like, 1,000 years later, and I still remember it. I told my mom, and I think she went and talked to her or something. I never did hear it. She didn't apologize to me. The lady didn't, but she didn't call me that again. But I mean, it was weird. It was weird. Why would you call somebody that? Because I didn't do it. That didn't even make any sense. But anyway, it's kind of a rough thing to call somebody. But there are bigger things that when it happens, that when some woman does something, that whether it's men or maybe other women or in a religious setting, they don't like. When I was doing little Google searches, put in the Google image search, Queen Jezebel, was looking for little pictures I could add here and there. I would see, old artwork and paintings and things that were kind of interesting. But crazy thing that I kept seeing, I saw pictures of Queen Elizabeth. I saw pictures of Meghan Markle. I saw pictures of Michelle Obama. I saw pictures of every ruler you can think of, whether it was Pelosi or Kamala Harris. Those are the most recent ones. Tons of stuff of Queen Elizabeth. And I don't think it was just because I put Queen in. It's because there's a whole lot of religious people who think that if you're a woman, because I sometimes would look at some of the little references in the pages that it was what these images were from. And that's what is connected with a woman, is she's a Jezebel. If she has a voice, if she has power, if she has any kind of control, she's a Jezebel. Now you can go deeper into some very intense religious segments of our evangelical Christian cultures, and you will see very quickly that women are told to be silent and be quiet and let men rule, and you are considered Jezebel. This is the worst thing that you can call somebody. You're big fat Jezebel. It's like calling somebody a Nazi. It's a bad thing to do. And when I was a youth pastor, kids it was kind of a thing for a while. They would say, "Oh, you accidentally said you Nazi" or something. I would always shut it down fast, because I was like, "Do you have any clue what that means? A Nazi is a terrible, horrible thing to call somebody. It's murder. It's evil." And that's the kind of thing with Jezebel as well. So to equate Jezebel with just being a woman is pretty awful, but we women do get that. She commits the same sins that many men throughout the scriptures did. I saw someone on Facebook that after Will Smith walked up and slapped was Jamie Foxx? No, Chris Rock. When he slapped Chris Rock, the next couple of days, everybody was going crazy, and people started blaming Will Smith's wife. She was called a Jezebel. She was told, it was said that she was the one that caused him to do it. I saw Christians say it. I saw a Facebook post about it. I was furious. It was crazy that people were making that kind of connection, and then were saying even worse things about her because of her health issues and her baldness and things like that, and throwing out scriptures that had to do with that. And nobody knew anything. When nobody knew why he did it. Nobody still to this day knows why he did it. Nobody knows what their relationship was. And we don't know what was going on in his head or her head or anything else. And yet she was immediately blamed, and she was called a Jezebel. Y'all, that's nuts. That is crazy. We got to be careful of that. Some who sin, some of the men, other and women, but in the men in the scriptures, they did repent of things. Ahab repented at one point, even though he was called the most wicked of all. He did have a moment of repentance. But these men did pretty horrible things throughout scriptures. And Jezebel, she never repented. We know that. She witnessed the power of God. She was in and around it. She heard about it. She saw it. She had prophecies that were spoken that she could have lined up with. She lived in God's country, but she never even dipped her toe in the Yahweh water. She stayed teen pagan all the way. Jezebel's sins were pride, murder, lying, manipulation. She's Jehu calls her a witch, sorceress. Her sins were not being a strong woman who wore makeup and had leadership skills. This was not her sin. Her sin was all the other things that we can also relate to men. Men, women can all be prideful, murdering, lying, and manipulative. Recognizing this does not mean that I or any of us are pro Jezebel. Oh my gosh, no, we just need to dislike her for the right reasons. We dislike her because she's prideful and murderous and lying and manipulative, not because she's a woman, not because she wore makeup and stood up for her man and or anything like that. There's a paper by Lynn, it might be a book actually, but Lynn Japinga, she says this: ever since Adam blamed Eve for handing him that piece of fruit, women have been considered dangerous, and that we have irresistible sex appeal, that we use men to do our bidding. On the one hand, women can be viewed as intellectually deficient, we're stupid, and we're irrational. And then all of a sudden, on the other hand, we're conniving and intelligent and dangerous. So which one is Jezebel? Which one are we? Are we stupid and irrational, or are we like conniving and using men for our own wicked schemes? We're too stupid to realize the flaws in our own religion or our own practices, but we're smart enough to entice our husbands to worship false gods. Like which one is Jezebel? Which one are we? Both men and women can be selfish and greedy and lustful and power hungry and manipulative, whether it's a woman in great power in a government type situation, or women that we know in church situations or in community situations in our own neighborhoods. Both men and women are equally sinful. They're equally responsible for their sin. Both are equally forgiven, equal recipients of grace, and equally capable of love, affection, courage, and leadership. All I'm saying, you guys, is if, once again, as always, just taking a little bit deeper look at who this person is, and if people are going to be throwing out that name, maybe say something, maybe do a little typing of something. Just say, I'm not sure if that's exactly true, that just because it's a woman doing it, that she's a Jezebel, because a man can act like a Jezebel too, and be prideful and murderous and evil and power hungry and all that. Sins and virtues are not gender specific. And if we say all men are this, courageous, or all men are lustful, or all men are prideful, and all women are scheming, or all women are stupid or conniving or sexually manipulative, any of those things, promiscuous, if we just put them by gender, I think if we're really thinking, we know that those are not true. There is a huge difference between a passionate woman and an angry woman. There's a difference between a woman with healthy boundaries and a woman with trust issues, because sometimes we got some trust issues, and we might come off a little strong with our men, with our families. That doesn't make us Jezebel. There's a difference between a confident woman, yay, confidence, and a proud woman. There's a difference between a strong woman and a bitter woman. And sometimes they kind of mix together, just like they do with men. There's a difference between a woman with leadership skills and a Jezebel controlling woman. Before you call a woman angry, bitter, untrusting, or proud, ask yourself, if a man was acting like that, would they respond the same way? I think it's important that we do that. It's important that we just call out what it is. If it's sin, it's sin. If it's pride, it's pride. It doesn't have anything to do with men or women. And we have to point out that difference. If little meme I saw, if we could just go ahead and stop calling every powerful, opinionated, strong woman a Jezebel, that'd be swell. Thank you very much. First and Second Kings, those books we were in, are a look at the unfaithfulness of God's people. It's what some historians refer to as, I just learned this phrase, this term, a Deuteronomistic, I said it wrong, view of history. It's taking these stories that I've told you before are not always necessarily chronological. They're not telling us every single detail. It's taking all of these stories about these kings, and they're saying, look, these people and these kings, these leaders, and then the people under them are not following the one true God. They're unfaithful, and here they were told about God. We can look at these texts if we're functioning and ask ourselves, are we like Elijah? Do we bring God's word, and do we speak God's word to justice? Or are we operating like Ahab, who knew God's truths and just went against them for his own pleasure and his own power? Or are we operating like a Jezebel, who acted according to her own desires? for power and just the wicked traditions and the evil that she was raised in. We can be one or all of them at different times. We have to ask ourselves, and we have to ask ourselves that about those that we're praying for, and whether it's government situations or not. Now, I'm about to, I'm going to take a deep dive, y'all. I'm probably about to get my charismatic card taken away from me, but I'm just going to go ahead and go for it. There's two popular books that have made this term the Jezebel spirit. Has anybody, raise your hand if you've heard about the Jezebel spirit? If you are a good charismatic spirit-filled person, you have definitely heard it. I was trying really hard. It was really hard to do. And I don't even really know if I did a good job, but I was trying to figure out, where did this phrase come from? Where did this term come from? Jezebel spirit. She's got a Jezebel spirit. He's got a Jezebel spirit. I'm praying against the Jezebel spirit. People who I very much respect, and I'm saying it in kind of a mean way, but people who I respect greatly, great intercessors, pray about and against and things like that, and refer to and do teachings on the Jezebel spirit. All I'm going to do is just do a little bit of history. So don't be grabbing my spirit-filled card away from me. I'm just saying it's something that we should be very careful of, because it's not as clear as maybe we've made it seem. It seems that the beginnings of this came from one book in particular, The Three Battlegrounds, or Raise Your Charismatic Hand if you've heard of that, maybe even read it. Got it on the bookshelf, by Francis Frangipane. That's a guy I double checked, in 1994. And Unmasking the Jezebel Spirit, which is a more recent one, John Paul Jackson. I don't really know about that one, but I have heard about The Three Battlegrounds. Now, this is the phrase that I believe this is where this term kind of started, really took off being popular. I could be wrong, but that's the history that I could do. That's where it seemed to have started. It's a very popular, this term Jezebel spirit. It's very popular, easy way to explain things like manipulation or control. Oh, that's Jezebel spirit. I probably, in the last 2 weeks, I've probably heard it, I don't know, a couple of times from people, or seen it somewhere. It's very popular. And it just has to do with manipulation or control. And we know that there's a Bible verse that talks about it. In fact, I literally had somebody quote this to me today as I was discussing this with them. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Now, if you are a good spirit-filled person, if you're a good little evangelical Christian, you know that the word seems to indicate in verses like this, it's this one in particular, that there are rulers in place. Demonic forces is what we seem to understand here. I'm not going against, I'm just telling you, just sort of giving a nice little hermeneutics about this, that there's power in different areas of the world, and some of the world's worst problems may be due to these spiritual forces. And it's not necessarily because of geography or history or political conditions or elections or anything like that, that there are spiritual forces that are moving in against people or for things and against them and things like that. This is what these kind of verses talk about in Ephesians. Okay, we can agree that the Bible says that, okay? Now in scripture, Jezebel is a person. The Bible mentions Jezebel, but does not say anything about a Jezebel spirit or a spirit of Jezebel. That is not a phrase that is from the word of God. And in many charismatic circles, they believe that this Jezebel spirit, and some believe in its existence, and that this evil woman of the Old Testament is now a female demon going about influencing mostly women. I believe that's what it says in Francis Frangipane book, that it influences mostly women to be like her. In other words, manipulative and controlling. They don't usually go to the extent of evil, murderous manipulator, but mostly just if you're a prideful woman, or if you're manipulative or controlling, then that's Jezebel. That's the Jezebel spirit. Okay, y'all haven't pulled my card yet, have you? Okay, because I have to tell you, I'm kind of leaning against it a bit, just a bit. There was a real woman who lived and died. Her spirit does not currently roam the earth in the form of a demon and influence people. That's not happening. Now, there are controlling things in the world, and it's easier a lot of times as Christians to say, to relate things that we see happening to something that we can do in the Bible. Like we could say, oh, I'm doing a Daniel fast. Okay, if you know anything about Daniel, you know, oh, that's a certain type of fast, vegetables or waters. Or or someone is being like a Gideon, where maybe they're a little bit afraid, or someone's being a friend of mine when he's around my kids when they were little and his own kids and stuff, he would say, don't act like Cain and Abel, two siblings who fought. Now, of course, you're not expecting one to kill the other, but you're saying don't be fighters, don't fight. Really, it'd probably be better to be more like Jacob and Esau, but he always went with Cain and Abel. So we understand what that means, but the whole idea of a spirit of Jezebel actually connecting it to a woman, and then it often is used against women. That's the problem I'm having. It's not really, I understand that we connect manipulation, control, and things like that, and we say, oh, it's demonic, it's evil, so we attach it to someone. I'm just saying, I mean, just to say it's her and then to say that it mostly operates through women, I just don't believe it. We look for moral or spiritual truths in these Bible characters, whether it's David, who did a lot of bad stuff, or, any of the patriarchs who did a lot of bad stuff, or Mary or Martha or anything like that. But sometimes we pay too much attention to the moral lesson and we throw away the history and we say, well, why was it even being presented? What was going on with these characters? Is everything about Jezebel? I mean, she was a murderous witch, sorceress, crazy pagan priestess. I mean, if I call somebody a Jezebel, does that mean I'm saying that? No, probably not. Then there's a whole story in Revelation. In the book of Revelation, there's this pronouncement that says, it's Jesus speaking to the church. So that here's where we get more of the Jezebel stuff, just doing a little more history for you. But I have this against you, Jesus is saying to the church. You put up with that woman, Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet. You allow her to teach and to mislead my servants into committing sexual immorality, eating food sacrificed to idols. So anything to do with idolatry. And I gave her time to change her life and her heart, but she refuses to change her life of prostitution. Now, back in the olden days, in the New Testament, there was certain practices. Even though you would become a Christian, a lot of times you would stay linked to the idolatry, the pagan gods that were around you. It took a while to break away from that, and a lot of them in certain places like Ephesus, being a woman meant that there was prostitution involved, and that's how you worshipped and the god and things like that. So it wasn't just that she was necessarily going around sleeping with everybody. It probably had to do with she hadn't gotten rid of her pagan worship. Anyway, it says that Jesus talks about this woman. He says making her sick. Now this is the Spirit of God speaking to John, I believe, in Revelation. So it's about these churches and things like that. So it's a little bit deeper kind of a thing. But he's talking about this woman, Jezebel. Jezebel seems to be a female member of this church, Thyatira. She was promoting these destructive heresies, and it was leading to the rest of the people compromising. So once again, one person doing something that was leading people astray, very similar to the Old Testament Jezebel. She was a real person. Her name is probably not Jezebel, because it seems kind of harsh to name somebody Jezebel, but it was the idea of her wickedness. So she was called Jezebel. She was a so-called prophetess. She was wicked. She was dangerous. So they connected her to the Old Testament lady. But in this verse, it says, you allow her to teach and to mislead. That's the complaint against her. She's allowed to lead other people astray. She's allowed to be a leader. And this is saying, no, it's messing people up. I want you to stop. This is the person who's causing this problem. Get her out of here. She's the problem here. And they're tolerating it. It's the tolerating of the wickedness. It's weakness connected to wickedness that is allowing evil to thrive. Stop it. Stop allowing it. Don't be weak. It's the same as Jezebel and Ahab. Weakness of Ahab. He didn't stand up to her. He didn't stand up for Team God. When finally people were willing to speak truth to them, to Ahab and Jezebel, to join with the new Jehu that was riding in, then evil was able to be brought down. You have to get rid of the wickedness by speaking truth to it. You have to be stronger than it. It's not necessarily just because it's a woman and it's Jezebel that is the problem. It's about wickedness. It's about how are we going to get rid of wickedness. And this quote again, the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. We have to stand up against injustice. We have to do the right thing. We do not want to be weak in the face of wickedness. That's what I think the message, there's a lot of messages, but that I think is the message against Jezebel activity, against evil, is we have to be strong. And that looks different for all of us. Sometimes it's a simple word spoken, sometimes it's powerful intercession. It's asking God to send out his armies and do good. But wickedness is around us. It has always been around us. It will always be around us. And so we have to stand up against it. Does anybody have anything? This is the website where you can get all of these teachings if you're still looking for some, but let me just ask you, does anybody have any thoughts, questions? I kind of went a little bit different direction there. Nobody took, lightning did not strike me. So far, so good. But anybody ever heard that about the Jezebel spirit, or had any thoughts about Jezebel? Anybody sitting around thinking about Jezebel? Thoughts? Nothing, as usual. Y'all have nothing to say, making me look good. Nope. Well, I lost a couple of you. Ran away. Well, I think she's an interesting character. Jezebel is scary, scary, scary. I was a little nervous about looking deeper into her life. I'd heard and read all those stories, of course, but it's always good to look. I always love looking deeper into the history of what was really going on in and around her. I think everything with her was about being that priestess. Everything was about staying committed. I mean, if you want to find something to admire her for, I guess that's what it is. She stayed committed all the way to the very end. She went hard for sure. Anybody, Carrie, did you have something you were gonna say? You unmuted, sorry.
Mrs. Carpenter that said that to you?
I don't remember her names. No, you can't throw out names.
She's dead.
Teacher. I don't know. I can't remember her name. I remember what she looked like though. But
was the Jezebel referred to anywhere else?
Nope, that's it. I gave you all the references. Unless I missed one, but those are, I'm pretty sure I gave you all the references. The one in Revelation was a bad one, but once again, it seems to be that was a particular person, and we have to ask, what was that particular woman doing that was causing the problem? She was leading people astray, but so what was really going on? I think that's always.
And is it always like a stronger personality woman?
Doesn't have to be a woman. It can be a man. There's
a person, yeah.
Stronger person who can lead people astray for sure. I mean, there's several other people in the New Testament who got in a lot of trouble for leading people astray, and Paul and others came down hard on them. But if your name's Jezebel, don't name your kid Jezebel, man. Yep. All right. Well,
So, Dave, I have a question for you.
Yeah, go.
Hi, Mel.
Hi, Mel.
Hey, is there other, like Jezebel's spirit, the book about Jezebel's spirit? Is there actual books about like biblical references to men in that same sort of idea? David's spirit or something.
No.
Awesome.
Written by women.
Yeah, no, you don't really hear much about the spirit of Ahab. Haven't heard of that one, have you? I mean,
No.
I think if you were like in a big time like intercession, you might reference, like, God, may you break the forces of, wickedness of Ahab or things like that. But the spirit of Jezebel is definitely the big one. Now, if you went through some of those deep intercessions books, like those ones I mentioned, I haven't really read them, but if you were looking hard, you would probably see, because they're actual spiritual warfare books. And so they're telling you, this is how you fight this is this kind of spirit, this is what this ruler looks like, this is what this principality looks like, which is from Ephesians. I haven't done a deep, I'm more of a history story kind of person, and I don't really go into, I haven't done a lot of teaching on intercession, so I'm willing to say I don't know a whole lot. I'm just talking about this one topic tonight. Everybody that's watching can chill out. But yeah, spirit of Jezebel is the big one. That's the one that they like to go out. Oh, Paula says she has heard of the spirit of Ahab. Yeah. So it's just not as prevalent. You don't hear it. I've never heard that one, but yeah.
What about the spirit of Potiphar?
Spirit of Potiphar. Yeah, he was decent actually. All right, next week we're gonna next lesson we're gonna talk about Athaliah. That is the daughter of Jezebel, which you probably don't know about her, but the spirit of
What's her
Athaliah,
name?
huh? Athaliah,
What's her name?
Athaliah.
Athaliah.
She's bad. She's really bad. So bad. So much worse. You thought Jezebel was bad. Wait till you meet her daughter. She's also hold my beer. Watch this, mama. You thought, oh, mama, I'm going to make you proud. Athaliah is going to make her mama proud. All right, guys. May all of you be blessed. I'm going to end the recording and then y'all can stay on here for just a little bit. Be blessed.
I'm coming over there.
Stop talking. I'm ending.